Have you ever noticed something that feels almost unfair, almost like a cruel twist of fate? The moment you finally stop chasing someone, the moment you finally start pulling your energy back, suddenly they begin to notice you. Suddenly they text more, they show curiosity, they seem warmer, more interested, almost like the version of them you were hoping for all along. And it leaves you sitting there wondering, why now? Why only after I stopped trying so hard? Why didn't they see my value when I was giving them everything? There's a deep emotional truth behind this pattern, something that goes far beyond coincidence or timing. It's not random. It's not luck. It's something psychological, something energetic, something that operates quietly beneath the surface of human connection. And once you understand it, everything begins to make sense. Not just this situation, but many of the confusing dynamics you've experienced in relationships. Because what you're witnessing isn't just their behavior, it's a reflection. A mirror, a subtle but powerful effect that reveals how people perceive your value based on how you treat yourself. This is what can be called the mirror effect. It's the invisible law of emotional reflection in relationships. People don't just respond to what you give them, they respond to the energy behind it. They respond to how much you value yourself, how much you respect your own time, your own presence, your own emotional availability. When you give endlessly, when you prioritize them above yourself, when your attention becomes constant and predictable, something shifts. Not consciously, not intentionally, but deeply within their perception, your value begins to feel guaranteed. And anything that feels guaranteed slowly starts to feel less special. It's not because you weren't enough. It's not because you didn't care enough. In fact, the truth is often the opposite. You cared too much in a way that slowly disconnected you from yourself. You gave so much of your energy, your attention, your emotional presence that you unknowingly taught them something, that you would always be there no matter what. And when that happens, the dynamic changes, the balance shifts, the mystery fades, and without even realizing it, they stop chasing because they no longer feel like they have to. But here's where it gets interesting. The moment you begin to step back, the moment you stop overgiving, the moment you start reclaiming your time, your focus, your energy, something activates within them. It's subtle at first, a thought, a feeling, a sense that something is different. You're no longer as available. You're no longer reaching out the same way. You're no longer pouring into them like before. And suddenly the certainty they once felt begins to crack. And in that space, curiosity is born. To understand why this happens, you have to understand the emotional world of someone who struggles with closeness. There's a part of them that desires connection, that wants intimacy, that enjoys your presence. But at the same time, there's another part, a deeper, quieter part, that feels overwhelmed by too much closeness. To them, emotional intensity can feel like pressure. Too much attention can feel like expectation. And when they sense that someone is getting too close, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to create space. So when you were giving your all, when you were showing up fully, when you were trying to build something meaningful, they may have felt something entirely different from what you intended. Instead of feeling loved, they may have felt pressured. Instead of feeling secure, they may have felt like they were losing their sense of control. And so they pulled back, not because you weren't valuable, but because your presence felt too overwhelming for where they were emotionally. This is where the confusion begins. Because from your perspective, you were doing everything right. You were showing love, consistency, care. You were investing in the connection. But from their perspective, your energy may have felt like too much, too soon, too constant. And instead of bringing them closer, it triggered distance. There's a paradox here that most people don't realize. The more emotionally available you become to someone who isn't ready to meet you at that level, the less they tend to value it. Not because it lacks worth, but because it lacks rarity. When something is always there, always accessible, always given without limits, it stops feeling like something that can be lost. And if something doesn't feel like it can be lost, it doesn't feel as valuable. This doesn't mean you should play games. It doesn't mean you should withhold love or pretend not to care. But it does mean that there is a difference between healthy emotional availability and overextension. There is a difference between showing up with love and losing yourself in the process of trying to be chosen. And that's where many people find themselves without even realizing it. Slowly, subtly, they begin to prioritize the other person more than themselves. Their mood becomes dependent on how the other person responds. Their thoughts revolve around what they said, what they didn't say, when they'll text, why they're distant. Their sense of stability starts to come from something outside of them, and without noticing it, they begin to drift away from their own center. You might have started canceling your own plans just to be available. You might have overanalyzed every interaction trying to understand what went wrong. You might have given more patience, more understanding, more effort than you were receiving, hoping that eventually they would meet you there. And in doing so, you weren't just giving to them, you were slowly taking away from yourself. And here's the truth that can be hard to accept. The moment you start losing yourself for someone else, the dynamic begins to shift in a way that rarely works in your favor. Because attraction isn't just about how much you give, it's about how you carry yourself while giving. It's about whether you remain grounded in your own worth, your own life, your own identity, or whether you start orbiting around someone else completely. When you lose that balance, when your energy becomes focused entirely on them, it changes how they perceive you, not consciously, not intentionally, but energetically. You stop feeling like someone they need to invest in and start feeling like someone who is already invested, no matter what. And again, anything that feels guaranteed begins to lose its emotional weight. Then comes the turning point. And for many people, this moment doesn't come from strategy. It comes from exhaustion. From reaching a place where you simply can't give anymore, where you realize that no matter how much effort you put in, it's not being matched, where you feel emotionally drained, confused, maybe even hurt, and something inside you says, enough. You stop initiating as much. You stop overthinking every little thing. You stop waiting for their messages like your happiness depends on it. You begin to redirect your attention back to your own life, your own priorities, your own peace. And even if it starts as a defense mechanism, it becomes a form of self-reconnection. And this is where the shift begins, because the moment you pull your energy back, you remove the constant reassurance they were unconsciously relying on. You remove the certainty that you will always be there in the same way. And suddenly, they feel something they didn't feel before. Your absence. Not just your physical absence, but your emotional absence. The space where your attention used to be. The silence where your effort used to exist. And in that silence, something starts to echo. Questions begin to form. Thoughts begin to surface. Feelings that were once suppressed by distance now have room to come forward. And just like that, the same person who seemed distant begins to lean in. Not always in a dramatic way. Sometimes it's subtle. A message out of nowhere, a sudden curiosity about what you're doing, a shift in tone, a sense that they're paying more attention than before. And it leaves you wondering, is this real? Is this genuine? Or is this just happening because I stepped back? And the answer lies within the very pattern you're now beginning to see. It's the mirror effect in motion, the reflection of value, energy, and presence. When you were over-giving, they mirrored distance. When you created space, they mirrored interest. Not because they changed overnight, but because the dynamic changed. And understanding this is powerful, because it takes you out of confusion and places you into clarity. It helps you see that it was never about you not being enough. It was about the imbalance of energy, the overextension of your presence, the way your value was being expressed in a form that couldn't be fully received. And as you continue forward, this awareness becomes your strength, because now it's no longer about chasing someone's attention, it's about honoring your own. It's no longer about trying to prove your worth. It's about embodying it quietly, consistently, without needing validation. And that's where everything begins to change, not on the surface, not in dramatic gestures, but deep within you. Because once you start seeing the pattern, you can't unsee it. You begin to recognize how much of yourself you were giving away just to feel chosen. You start noticing how your energy was constantly reaching outward instead of being grounded inward. And slowly, almost quietly, a realization begins to form that somewhere along the way you stopped choosing yourself. It doesn't happen all at once. Losing yourself in someone is never loud or obvious. It's subtle. It's in the small compromises you told yourself didn't matter. It's in the moments where you silenced your needs just to keep the connection peaceful. It's in the times you felt confused or hurt, but convinced yourself to be more understanding instead of being honest about what you were feeling. And over time, all those small moments begin to add up until one day you realize you've been pouring from a place that hasn't been refilled in a long time. You might look back and notice how your days started revolving around them, how your mood depended on their consistency, how a simple message from them could lift you up and their silence could bring everything down. And the hardest part is, you didn't even question it at first. Because when you care deeply, it feels natural to give deeply. It feels natural to invest, to show up, to be present. But there's a line between giving from wholeness and giving from emptiness. And when that line gets crossed, something shifts inside of you. You begin to feel anxious instead of secure. You begin to feel uncertain instead of grounded. You start questioning your worth based on how someone else shows up. And without realizing it, you hand over your emotional stability to someone who isn't even aware they're holding it. This is the moment where many people begin to feel stuck, because part of you still hopes that if you just give a little more, understand a little more, love a little deeper, things will change. But another part of you is tired of waiting, tired of guessing, tired of feeling like you're the only one trying to keep something alive. And eventually, that tiredness becomes clarity. Not anger, not resentment, just a quiet, undeniable truth that you can't keep losing yourself just to keep someone else. So you begin to pull back. Not as a strategy, not as a game, but as a form of self-preservation. You start responding instead of initiating. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing conversations that feel one-sided. You give space, not to manipulate, but because you finally realize you need it too. And at first, it feels uncomfortable. It feels unnatural. Because you've been so used to giving, so used to reaching, so used to making the effort. There's a part of you that wonders if you're doing the wrong thing, if stepping back means losing them completely, if creating distance will push them further away. But what you don't realize yet is that this distance is exactly what reveals the truth. Because for the first time, the dynamic is no longer being carried by your effort alone. For the first time, there's space for them to either step forward or stay where they are. And in that space, everything becomes clear. This is where something almost unexpected begins to happen. The same distance that once made you anxious now begins to awaken something in them, because when your energy was constant, it became predictable. When your presence was always there, it became expected. But now, it's different. Now there's space where there used to be certainty. And that space creates a shift. They start to notice the silence. They start to feel the absence of your attention. They begin to realize that something has changed, even if they can't fully explain what it is. And for someone who is used to keeping emotional distance, this new distance doesn't feel like comfort. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like something is slipping away. And that feeling, that subtle sense of loss, is what begins to pull them back in. Because here's something that often goes unnoticed. People don't always recognize the value of what they have when it's constantly available. They recognize it when they feel it might not be there anymore. Not because they're intentionally careless, but because human perception is deeply tied to contrast. We understand presence through absence. We understand value through the possibility of losing it. So when you step back, when you stop overgiving, when you begin to hold your energy differently, you create that contrast, and suddenly they start leaning in. They might reach out more. They might ask questions they never asked before. They might show a level of attention that feels surprising, even confusing. And part of you wants to believe that this means everything has changed, that maybe now they see your worth, that maybe now they're ready to meet you where you've always been. But before you jump to that conclusion, there's something deeper you need to understand. Because what's happening right now isn't just about interest, it's about perception. It's about how your value is being reflected back to you based on the way you are now showing up. This is the core of the mirror effect. When you were overextending, they mirrored distance. When you began to reclaim your energy, they mirrored curiosity. When you stopped chasing, they started noticing, not because they suddenly became a different person, but because the dynamic you were both operating in has shifted. You're no longer showing up from a place of needing their validation. You're no longer placing them at the center of your world. You're standing in your own space. And that changes everything, because now your presence feels different. It's no longer heavy with expectation. It's no longer filled with the pressure of constant availability. It feels lighter, more grounded, more self-contained, and that kind of energy is naturally attractive. Not because you're trying to be distant, but because you're no longer abandoning yourself to maintain the connection. And when someone senses that shift, even unconsciously, they respond to it. They begin to value your time more because it no longer feels unlimited. They begin to notice your absence because your presence is no longer constant. They begin to feel drawn toward you because you're no longer moving toward them in the same way. This is the value shift. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to yourself. It's about realizing that your worth was never something that needed to be proven through effort. It was something that needed to be protected through balance. And the moment you stop giving from a place of fear and start showing up from a place of self-respect, everything begins to reflect that back to you. But here's where you need to stay grounded, because just as quickly as this shift happens, it can also pull you back into the same cycle if you're not aware. When they start showing interest again, when they begin reaching out, when they give you the attention you were once craving, it can feel validating. It can feel like confirmation that you were right to hold on, that maybe now things will finally be different. But this is the moment where your awareness matters the most, because the question isn't just why they're coming back. The question is who you are when they do. Are you the same version of yourself who overgave, who overextended, who lost balance trying to make it work? Or are you now someone who understands their own value, who knows the importance of emotional boundaries, who can receive attention without immediately giving everything back? Because the mirror effect doesn't stop working once they return. It continues. If you go back to overgiving, the dynamic will slowly return to what it was. If you stay grounded in your self-worth, the dynamic will either evolve or reveal that it cannot meet you where you now stand. And that's the truth that gives you power. Because now, it's no longer about trying to make someone value you. It's about choosing whether their behavior aligns with the value you've already recognized within yourself. And that shift changes everything. Because now you're no longer standing in the same emotional space you once were. Before, you were hoping they would see your value. Now you're beginning to feel it for yourself. Before, you were giving without limits. Now you're becoming aware of where your energy goes and why it matters. And this is where another layer of truth begins to unfold. Something that can feel uncomfortable at first, but incredibly empowering once you understand it. Because what you're witnessing isn't just about them coming back. It's about how value is perceived in human connection. It's about something deeper. The role of emotional scarcity. Scarcity isn't about playing games. It's not about pretending to be unavailable or creating distance just to trigger someone. It's about something far more real than that. It's about the natural human tendency to value what feels limited, what feels chosen, what feels like it could be lost. When something is constantly available, constantly given, constantly within reach, it stops feeling like something that requires effort to keep. And this is where many people get it wrong. They believe that the more they give, the more they will be valued. That love must be proven through constant presence, constant effort, constant reassurance. But the truth is, when giving becomes endless without boundaries, it loses its emotional weight. Not because it's not meaningful, but because it's no longer rare. When you were always there, always responding, always making time, no matter what, your presence became predictable. And predictability, in excess, can slowly turn into invisibility, not because you don't matter, but because your absence was never felt. There was no contrast, no space for appreciation to grow. But now there is. Now your time feels different. Your attention feels different. Your energy is no longer something that can be assumed, and that changes how it's perceived, because now when you show up, it feels intentional. It feels chosen. It carries weight again. And this is what begins to draw them in. Not just because they miss you, but because they're experiencing something they didn't before. The possibility that you are no longer as available as you once were. The realization that your presence is no longer guaranteed. And in that realization, something inside them shifts. They start reaching out. Sometimes it's subtle. A message that feels casual, almost like nothing has changed. Sometimes it's more direct, like they suddenly want to reconnect, to check in, to see where you stand. And sometimes it's confusing because the same person who once felt distant is now showing interest in a way that feels almost unfamiliar. And in those moments, it's easy to feel pulled back in because a part of you has been waiting for this. Waiting for them to show up, waiting for them to meet you halfway, waiting for some sign that what you felt wasn't one-sided. And now that it's happening, it can feel like everything is finally falling into place. But this is where clarity becomes essential, because attention is not the same as change. Just because someone comes back doesn't mean they've grown. Just because they reach out doesn't mean they're ready for the kind of connection you were offering. And just because they show interest now doesn't mean they've understood the impact of their past behavior. Sometimes, what brings them back isn't transformation. It's the shift in the dynamic. It's the fact that your energy is no longer the same. It's the curiosity of something that now feels different. It's the pull of something that no longer feels certain. And that doesn't automatically mean they're ready to give you what you truly need. This is why it's so important not to confuse their return with resolution. Because if nothing has changed beneath the surface, the same patterns will eventually repeat. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the exact same way, but over time, the dynamic will fall back into its old rhythm, unless you've truly changed. And this is where your focus needs to stay, not on their words, not on their sudden attention, but on your own growth, your own awareness, your own boundaries, because while they may be reacting to your shift, the real transformation is happening within you. You're beginning to see your worth without needing them to reflect it back. You're starting to understand that your value isn't something that increases or decreases based on someone else's behavior. It's something that remains constant, whether they recognize it or not. And from that place, something powerful begins to emerge. Self-worth, not the kind that depends on validation, not the kind that comes and goes based on how someone treats you, but a deeper, more stable sense of knowing that you deserve consistency, respect, and emotional presence. And once you begin to feel that, you can't go back to what you once tolerated. You start to notice things you ignored before. You start to recognize patterns you once made excuses for. You start to feel the difference between someone who is truly present and someone who only shows up when the dynamic shifts. And instead of chasing clarity, you begin to embody it. You no longer feel the need to over-explain yourself. You no longer feel the urge to prove your worth through effort. You don't need to convince someone to see you because you already see yourself, and that changes the energy you carry. It becomes calmer, more grounded, less reactive. You're no longer pulled in every direction by someone else's inconsistency. You're no longer waiting, hoping, analyzing every small shift in their behavior. You're centered. And that kind of presence is magnetic in a completely different way, because now your energy isn't reaching outward in search of validation. It's steady, it's self-contained, it's rooted in your own sense of identity. And when someone interacts with that, they feel it. They feel the difference between who you were and who you've become. Before you were trying to be chosen, now you're choosing. Before you were giving from a place of wanting something in return, now you're giving only when it feels aligned with your own peace. Before your presence was driven by fear of losing them, now it's guided by respect for yourself. And that shift naturally creates attraction, not because you're trying to pull them in, but because you're no longer chasing them away from yourself. You're standing in your own space, living your own life, protecting your own energy, and from that place, your presence becomes something that others feel, rather than something you try to prove. This is the energy you now radiate. It's quiet but powerful. It doesn't demand attention, but it draws it in. It doesn't chase, but it doesn't hide either. It simply exists, grounded in self-worth. And the most important part is, this isn't something you're doing for them, it's something you're doing for you. Because at the end of the day, the goal was never to make someone value you after you stopped valuing them. The goal was to remember your value, regardless of how they show up. And once you truly step into that, everything else becomes a reflection of it. Because now you're no longer operating from fear. You're no longer making decisions based on whether someone might leave or stay. You're moving from something much deeper, self-respect. And self-respect changes how you show up in ways that don't need to be announced, explained, or justified. It quietly reshapes your standards. It redefines what you accept, what you allow, and what you walk away from. And one of the most powerful ways it begins to show itself is through boundaries. Not walls, not emotional distance meant to protect you from ever feeling again, but real, grounded boundaries. The kind that say, I can care about you, but not at the cost of myself. The kind that say, I can be open, but only with someone who meets me with the same intention. Boundaries are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They're about honoring your own. They're about recognizing that your time, your energy, your emotional presence are valuable, and not everyone gets unlimited access to them anymore. This is where many people struggle, because setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable at first. It can feel like you're being cold, distant, or even selfish, especially if you've been used to overgiving. But the truth is, boundaries are not rejection, they are clarity. They are the line between losing yourself and staying connected to who you are. And the moment you begin to hold that line, something shifts in how people interact with you. Because now, they're no longer engaging with someone who will accept anything just to keep the connection. They're engaging with someone who values themselves enough to expect consistency, respect, and effort in return. And if they come back, if they reach out again, showing interest, attention, maybe even a version of themselves that feels more aligned than before, this is where your awareness becomes everything. Because it's not about how quickly you respond, it's not about how much you feel in that moment, it's about how you choose to move forward. It's about whether you pause long enough to observe instead of immediately reacting. Because anyone can show up differently for a moment. Anyone can say the right things when they feel your distance. But real change is not something you hear. It's something you see over time. It's consistency, it's effort that doesn't fade once the dynamic feels comfortable again. It's presence that doesn't disappear the moment things settle. So if they come back, you don't rush, you don't fall back into old patterns, you don't give them the same version of you that once overextended just to make things work. Instead, you stay grounded, you watch, you listen, you feel, you allow their actions to reveal who they are, without trying to fill in the gaps with hope or assumption. And most importantly, you choose from self-respect, not from loneliness. Because that's the difference now. Before, you may have chosen them because you didn't want to lose them. Now you choose based on whether they align with the version of you that you've become, whether they meet you in a way that feels healthy, balanced, and real, whether they bring peace instead of confusion. And if they don't, you don't chase clarity anymore. You don't try to fix what isn't meeting you. You don't go back to convincing someone to see your worth. You let go. And sometimes they don't come back at all. And that can be one of the hardest parts to accept. Because a part of you may have believed that once you stepped back, once you reclaimed your energy, once you stopped chasing, they would finally realize your value and return. And when they don't, it can feel like a different kind of rejection, a quieter one that makes you question if any of it really mattered. But here's the deeper truth. Their absence is also clarity. Because if someone can walk away from your presence, your energy, your care, and never look back, then what you had was never aligned in the way you needed it to be. Not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't capable of meeting you where you stood. And that realization, while painful, is freeing. Because it shifts your perspective completely. You stop seeing it as losing them and start seeing it as finding yourself. You start recognizing that what you were holding on to wasn't actually fulfilling you. It was just familiar. And sometimes we confuse familiarity with connection, simply because it's what we've grown used to. But growth requires something different. It requires letting go of what feels comfortable when it no longer feels right. And in that space, something new begins to form, a deeper sense of peace, a stronger sense of identity, a version of you that no longer seeks validation from inconsistency, but naturally moves toward what feels stable, mutual, and real. And that's where the real power of this entire experience reveals itself. Because the mirror effect was never just about them. It was about you. It was about showing you where your energy was going, where your value was being overlooked, not because it didn't exist, but because it wasn't being protected. It was about teaching you that the way you treat yourself sets the tone for how others will treat you, that your presence becomes meaningful when it's not given away without awareness. Life, in many ways, reflects your internal state. The way you see yourself, the way you carry yourself, the way you allow others to engage with you, all of it creates a kind of feedback loop. And the more aligned you become with your own worth, the more your external experiences begin to mirror that alignment. You no longer attract people who thrive on inconsistency. You no longer feel drawn to dynamics that leave you questioning your value. You begin to move differently, choose differently, respond differently. Not because you're trying to control the outcome, but because you've changed the starting point. And that's what transforms everything. Because now, even if someone walks away, it doesn't shake you the way it once did. It doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't pull you into overthinking or self-doubt. You understand that not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay, and not everyone who leaves is a loss. Some people leave to reveal what you were settling for. Some experiences end to show you what you truly deserve. And when you fully embrace that, you stop chasing what isn't choosing you. You stop holding on to what isn't growing with you. You stop trying to force connections that only exist when you're the one keeping them alive. Instead, you choose yourself, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, consistent, undeniable way. In the way you protect your peace, in the way you honor your time, in the way you no longer abandon your needs just to feel wanted. And in that space, everything becomes clearer. Because the moment you stop chasing them, you didn't lose anything real. You found something far more important.